Good afternoon, good morning. This is Alan Ray Powell, and I'm out in Sacramento, California, and we're going to have an interview with Dr. Richard Leveton, who has recently moved from the Charleston, South Carolina area, where for many years he practiced St. James Island Chiropractic. And Richard was in Hamirpur in 1972, one of the first Westerners to go there. And he's going to be sharing some of his experiences and why Richard as the first person on our first Hamirpur Tales. That is because I was building a cabin in Athens, Maine in the fall of '73. And as a reward, decided to go to India via Myrtle Beach. And our first stop heading to Myrtle Beach was to 10R Boston Street in Somerville outside of Cambridge with Richard Leveton. And Richard had recently returned from India, and he had some special things to say about his trip to India, and he had a recommendation for me. So, Richard, why don't you go ahead and tell your tale, your portion of the tale here.
Thank you, Alan Ray. And before I start, I would like to praise and honor your efforts to be shedding some light on Hamirpur, the place in the world where Meher Baba basically described as his heart. And with that said, I had the good fortune to find myself in India in November of 1972. I had heard of Baba 3 or 4 years before that. I was not a total amateur. At that time, there were very few books, certainly very few films, and information about Baba was a lot more difficult to get at that time than it is now. But I fortunately found myself with enough information to think as a 22 or 23-year-old, it's time to go to India. And I think I had heard of Hamirpur prior to my trip in November of 1972, but there was no plans beforehand to go there. And on day one or day two, when I got there, walking around Meherdeep, I, as a serendipity, happened to bump into somebody who, unfortunately, I can't even remember who they are at this time, 52 or 3 years later, who said, "Hey, we've still got some room for the Hamirpur trip. Are you interested in going?" And without thinking, which I probably should have done, I said, "Sure. When are we going?" And they said the day after tomorrow or something. I don't recall exactly. So within just a very few days of finding myself in India for the first time, as literally a young adult, I was on my way from Ahmednagar to Bombay at that time, and there were 12 of us Westerners, with our host and co-host being Pukar and Panchal. We stayed that first night before we got onto a third-class railroad to go from Mumbai past Delhi north into Uttar Pradesh state. We stayed at Nariman and Anivaz's apartment. I think it was called Oceana at the time. They had invited us to stay, all 12 of us. And of course, at our age, we were happy to sleep on the floor, 5 or 6 in a room. Who cares? And here we were in this apartment that Meher Baba had probably been in who knows how many times before that. What an incredible start to our trip. And the next day, of course, Pukar had arranged our entire trip, third class railroad overnight which is very hard to describe in 1972 what that means. But as a 22 or 23-year-old, who cares? Now I would probably look back on it and say, no way. But that's for another story. So we made it. Alan, when we were talking a day or two ago, I believe you mentioned where our train ended somewhere north of Delhi. I don't recall the name of the town. Uh,
Jhansi.
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 And from Jhansi, Pukar again had arranged a. First of all, I think we went on what now looking back on it was either a Volkswagen minibus or something that looked a lot like it from that was made in India. I don't remember which, but the 12 of us squeezed in. It wasn't quite as squeezed as the blue bus back in the 30s and early 40s, but we were pretty tight in that little minibus. I guess there were at least 14 of us in it, and made it through a lot of land from Jhansi until dry riverbeds happened and no more roads happened. And from there, after uh, about at least 5 or 6 hours of going over dry riverbeds from where the minibus left off to where we were about to get to in Hamirpur district, we went on bullock carts. And I don't know if any of the people who are listening have been on bullock carts, but it's quite a remarkable experience. Um, any comments so far? I'll can
Uh, so before we get to the bullock carts, when you entered Hamirpur district, it was in the town of Hamirpur, correct?
again with the caveat that we're talking 52 years ago, and I honestly cannot answer that question well. I'll try to answer it as best as I can. Pukar and Panchal arranged the whole trip, and us dumb Westerners basically just did what we were told. And I have no idea where the minibus travel ended and the bullock carts started for literally hours, and whether we were already in what's known as Hamirpur district or somewhere else in Uttar Pradesh state, I do not know.
Okay. Be that as it may, when I accompanied Pukar, he took me around to the key places that Baba had been to. And when Baba entered Hamirpur, either on the 17th or 18th of November in 1952, he crossed a suspension bridge over the Jumna and the Betwa rivers, where they conjoin. One side is Kanpur, the other side is the little district of Hamirpur, and they had just completed the reconstruction of this suspension bridge. And Baba went across it in a motor vehicle. And when he got to the other side, the bridge collapsed. So he just made it. And so the first darshan tour, the first darshan was given in the town of Hamirpur, which is where where Pukar lived, where his family was. And you had an important encounter, which we'll get to in a little while. I'm going to ask you whether you want to talk about it before we talk about Mehewa Maristana, or whether you want to bring in Keshav Nigam now.
Thank you. I'd rather talk about Keshav in a little while and perhaps do some other stuff first that would move up to Keshav.
Excellent, excellent. And from my experience, where the bullock carts came in was going when Baba gave darshan on November 26th, and it was the last big public darshan of this first darshan tour in 52. It was at the Rabindranath Junior College, and 50,000 people took Baba's darshan on that day. And from there, Baba traveled on bullock cart about 6 or 8 kilometers to the village of Naranga. And I also made that journey on bullock cart with Pukar um, in 74. So, do you want to talk next about Mehoa Maristana?
Sure, let me start where I finished off and get into the things that you're saying, hopefully as chronologically as possible. Let me first say that in 1972, or I should say 1972 was the 20th anniversary of Meher Baba's first visit to Hamirpur district. It was not the year, which was 1954, that Meher Baba declared himself the avatar in Hamirpur, but it was the 20th anniversary of Baba's first visit to Hamirpur. And Pukar, who I believe was with Baba 20 years earlier, Pukar led us 12 Westerners in almost as exact a route as possible through Hamirpur on the exact days that Baba went 20 years earlier. Basically, the exact same town after town after town that Baba traveled. We were traveling basically with Pukar 20 years later, the same route. The first encounter that I'm sure we were in Hamirpur after the 5 or 6 miles of bullock carts, where we were totally shattered from having traveled by that time, 24 to 36 hours by then, the last 4 or 5 hours being on bullock carts, we were pretty wiped out, dusty, dirty, tired, thirsty, you name it. And an experience that we had, which I think, Alan, you mentioned that you had a similar experience. Pukar had obviously notified many of or some of the Hamirpur residents that we all were coming. And the love is almost unimaginable to try to describe. They were doing, when we got there, they were trying to do anything possible that they could with as much love that was tangible, that was almost impossible, that is almost impossible to describe. One of the first things they did, knowing we were coming on bullock carts, was get as fine a delicacy as they could think of for us to share with us upon our arrival at our first destination in Hamirpur. The delicacy was a big glass, about, I would say, 12 to 16 ounces of a glass full of orange juice, cold orange juice. And it was laced with the hottest peppers I have ever experienced in my life, whether it's Thailand, India, Mexico. I have no idea what their score was on whatever that score thing is that you measure peppers in. But when I got within about 10 feet of that glass of orange juice, my eye started watering and I almost passed out. It was so hot. But this was the gift that they were giving us with as much love as they could. And it was really difficult to, in our tired state, to not accept it, but it was so difficult to accept it and put it close to my face, which I was making believe I was drinking it with as much appreciation as possible. That was one of the more memorable experiences of getting to Hamirpur. I'm sure you
Thank
can
you.
recall something similar.
Yes, I was battling dysentery, which I had stayed for that first visit at the Dowlet. And the Dowlet was across from the trust compound. And the owner, Pilu, who herself was a Baba lover, served wonderful Indian food that was tempered to the Western palate. There were 10 little rooms in a U-shaped area, and we would there were tables in the middle where we would take our meals communally. So on a Sunday night after Amartithi, Pukar and I headed out, and he took me to the heart of the bazaar in Ahmednagar, and we went and ate at one of his favorite restaurants. And I couldn't begin to keep up eating with him, but in any event, when I woke up the next morning, I had dysentery. And who knows? Maybe it was a good thing. Maybe that's what kept me in my body. For the 2 weeks, for the close to 2 weeks that I was with Pukar and Hamirpur. So, how this relates to what you were just saying is that anywhere Pukar would take me, that we stopped. And the first time was in Jhansi at 3 o'clock in the morning. We knocked on it. We walked from the train station. I had no idea where we were going. And all of a sudden, Pukar knocks on a house. He wakes up the homeowner. Of course, it's a Baba lover. And we get invited in. And, and of course, he put food and chai out. And I wasn't the least bit hungry. But just as you had to take certain sips of that orange juice, it was anticipated, expected that I would eat. And when it came time to leave, this man started weeping. Unbelievable. And translated by Pukar, the man said it was the first time a Westerner, a Baba lover, had ever been to his home. And for him, it was as if Baba himself had come to bless his home.
Wonderful. Speaking of food, I'd like to add one thing which was not part of the exact flow, but while we were in Hamirpur traveling the route that Pukar had decided for us, which was the exact route Baba had taken 20 years earlier, another person joined our troop, an Indian whose name was Meherdeep. I have a picture of him somewhere. He was you might have met him, I'm not sure. In 19, he was probably in his, about by the time we met him, around 50. In his earlier life, prior to even meeting Baba in 1952, he was a master. He was a spiritual guide, master, whatever the proper term is, long hair, the whole deal, disciples, the whole deal, and had a following I certainly am not going to use the word legitimate, but I'll use it in a different way. He was a legitimate master doing his master things in India. In 1952 in Hamirpur district, he met Meher Baba and recognized, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, recognized, I've got to stop this master stuff. This guy's a master. I'm not a master. And basically gave his disciples and whatever. But the reason I'm bringing this up is for our trip in 1972, he was our cook. And he cooked for us. He traveled with us and knew we as Westerners could not handle harsh or pretty heavy duty Indian spicy food and toned down his cooking, but he traveled with us as our cook wherever we went, making food 3-4 times a day in his loving, he was a loving, wonderful, beautiful man who his life had been entirely changed by Meher Baba. The energy coming out of him, whether he was cooking or just hanging out with us, was just wonderful.
Thank you for adding that.
Yes.
I certainly knew nothing about that. And Mayor Das and Mayor Baba had quite a dance. There were times when he seemed to be in Baba's fold, doing Baba's work, and there were other times when he seemed to have too much ego in it. And but that's another tale which I really don't have any business talking about because it's not fresh in my memory bank, and anything that I would say would be third or fourth hand. So I'm happy that you had such a wonderful cook with you.
Indeed.
That's wonderful. So
Richard, can I ask a question about Meher Das? Because
Please.
I believe I met him the following year, but I'm maybe confusing two guys. One was Meherdeep, and I remember he was not that old, uh, but he had, like you say, he had uh, been like a master, and I believe the story about him holding a child that had died and repeating Baba's name, the child came back to life. That's Mayor Dossi you're talking about, right? You know that
Uh,
story?
my best answer that I can give you is, which I've already said, my my 76-year-old brain cells are starting to fail me a little bit when it comes to thinking about things 50 plus years ago. I
Okay.
believe what you said sounds vaguely familiar to me,
Okay.
but I cannot, the caveat is I cannot verify that that is
Okay.
absolutely the same guy, but it sounds familiar to me.
I'm pretty sure that was that was the name he took. But there was another guy that looked like a sadhu. He dressed in an orange, sadhu. But he
No.
but he
He
okay.
did
So
not.
that's
He was wearing Indian whites. He had
right.
long dark hair, but he was not
Good.
dressed as a sadhu, which one typically thinks what a sadhu looks like. He was not in
Right.
any way dressed like that.
Did you meet anybody there along the way that was dressing like that? Does that ring a bell?
Um, my best answer to that would be to say that Pukar, I think, I don't want to speak for him. My understanding was Pukar wanted to keep us pretty isolated from outside stuff and wanted to keep us focused on Hamirpur stuff that he had planned for us. So I don't think that we were I don't believe that he wanted us exposed to the outside world there.
Yeah.
That's not an exact way of saying it, but that's the best answer I can give you.
Good. Thank you.
So here it is, you get to Mehawa Mirastana, and it's around November 24th of 1952, give or take a day.
72.
Excuse me, of course, 72. Right.
Yes.
You're there for the 20th anniversary. Yes.
Yes.
So now you've arrived at Mehawa Mirastana.
And if you wish me to go on from there, off the top of my head, there were there were curious people. Just like I believe you said earlier, about being the only Baba lover anyone had ever had in their home and that sort of thing. There were Westerners had gone, like even the year before I was there. Um, Chuggin Master had brought some Westerners, who were in India, in Ahmednagar, had brought them to Hamirpur. Alan Khani being one of them, who's a good friend of mine, and so we were not the very first, but very few people in Hamirpur undoubtedly had in Hamirpur district, had met many Westerners, and people were, we were, I don't hate to use the word celebrities. We were just unusual people who were there. People were looking at us with bright eyes and curious and this and that. And Pukar again tried to keep us, I hate to say use the word shielded from them, but tried to sort of keep us going in places that he wanted us to go. We certainly met a lot of people. Everybody who we met was unbelievably caring and loving and just so full of just wanting to be helpful whenever they possibly could. It was just an amazing experience. There were parades, elephants, hundreds of people in parades with big chairs, like the chair in Mandalay Hall that was put up on these things that people were carrying around and with a big picture of Baba on it, that they were walking with it with elephants behind there and hundreds of people behind there for miles. This was a celebration time, and as a young, naive 22-year-old kid, it was just an eye-opening, what have I gotten myself into? But at the same time, although I didn't have the perspective that I have now, being a little older, I got it. I was fortunate to have had at least enough wherewithal to say, yes, I get it. This is pretty impressive, and I am unbelievably fortunate to be here.
And Meherwa was the home village of Keshav Narayan Nigam. And Keshav came from a very large family. And one of his brothers was Mukand Lal. And Mukand Lal was the caretaker of the Japti hut when you were there. Is that correct?
I believe that is true, yes. Again, my
And
memory is not perfect, but what little remnants I have of a memory 50 years ago, I believe that is correct.
did you want to say anything about Mukand Lal?
Um, I would rather, since there was much more contact with Keshav Nigam, I would rather spend time talking about him because memories of his brother are not nearly as deep in my mind.
Is it time to shift to talk about your time with Keshav?
Whatever you'd like, Alan.
Yeah, I think so. We got about 15 minutes left. So,
Great.
uh,
Any questions or comments before getting into that? It's sort of
well,
shifting
at,
gears.
at some future moment in these Hamirpur tales, we'll get Mukand Lal's full story.
Great.
But just to give our viewers, present and future, a glimpse, Mukand Lal had a very, very serious skin condition. And Baba gave him an apple, told him to eat the apple. And April 14th, I don't know exactly what year it was, he retired and he was still plagued with this skin condition. And when he woke up on the 15th of April, it was all gone. So there's more to that story, but that's the gist of it. So let's hear about um, Keshav Narayan Nigam lived when you were there in '72 in the town of Hamirpur, and you were given the opportunity to meet with him in his own home.
Correct. Um, yes. It looks like there's only one or two people on this, but for the future, where this could be important because Keshav is no longer with us. By the time that I met Keshav in 1972, he was very fragile. He was getting towards an advanced stage of Parkinson's. His talk was halting. His hand gestures, of course, with Parkinson's were also halting, but he was able to communicate perfectly. I don't know, again, who's going to be watching this in the future. He has, of course, there's a book written about his life and his time before meeting Baba and after meeting Baba, and the unbelievable work that he did for Baba, mostly in Hamirpur district. And the time that I again as a young adult, I don't believe that I had even heard of Keshav before I went to India, but having a chance to meet him, even as a 22 or 23-year-old, I got it. This guy is really important. When I was speaking with him, he was exuding so much energy and love and knowledge. To my young brain, I could barely grasp. I mean, I had met the Mandali by then in Meherabad and Meherzad, and without in any way trying to compare this person to that, but Keshav was right up there with anybody in terms of energy, wisdom, feeling about them who I have ever met. And I feel unbelievably fortunate that I had a chance to meet him. And after meeting him, he and I, after leaving Hamirpur, leaving India and making it back to America, we communicated through aerogram and letters on and off for a few years, which I also treasure. Um, I treasure those memories and the mailing that I have. I don't know if anyone can see this. I have 3 aerograms and one letter stationary from the Avatar Meher Baba Hamirpur uh, district stationery, where I was able to find them before getting onto this. Um, I'd be they're all, of course, wonderful memories to me, and I certainly don't want to burden with the time that we have left of either reading anything or a whole lot. But I do treasure the aerograms and the letters, and will be happy again to try to answer further anything about Keshav.
Well, we'd love it if you would read at least one of the three letters that you have.
Well, thank you. Since again, time is getting short, and before I made it to this, um, instead of reading a whole um, aerogram, I, I guess what I would I'll read a little bit, but what I would like to do is to say that I again received one um, letter and three aerograms. The letter was dated 31/10/1972, which is October 31st. The three letters were 14 February 1973, 10 April 1976, and 23 October 1978. All of these um, letters and aerograms were written in extraordinarily beautiful English cursive in a blue pen, much better than I could ever write cursive, by someone undoubtedly where English was their second language at best. And um, the at the end of each of these four things that I just showed, in little red ink printing, was on, I think, two of them in the red ink with says KN, and on the other two says um, K Nigam, again in red ink, as differentiated from the blue ink that was the content of the letters and the aerograms. My feeling is, and I cannot, this is purely my understanding, I'm not saying it's true, but I think that somebody else in blue ink at Keshav's request, writing down his words, wrote me these letters in blue ink. And at the very end, because of Keshav's fragile condition with his hand shaking and whatever, he actually, as best he could in the red ink, either signed KN Nigam or KN. I believe that the red was his actual handwriting and the blue was somebody else who was dictating for him.
And because of his advanced Parkinson's,
That is my feeling. Again, that is my
it.
understanding. Yes.
Right.
And on the, let's see if I can find it. On the aerogram dated, here are some words written in an aerogram I received from Keshav on the 14th of February, 1973. It was sent to me after I had left India back to America. The aerogram was sent to me at 10R Boston Street, as Alan mentioned earlier, which is where I was still living. And a brief part of the aerogram reads, "Beloved brother Richard," this is Keshav's words, "Beloved brother Richard, our hearty J Baba to you again and again. I had gone to Meherdeep. The date on this is 14 February. And Keshav said, I had gone to Meherdeep with my family to attend the function of beloved Baba's fourth Amar Tithi, which was very fine and inspiring. Our caravan of 58 men, women, 2 infants, and 1 minor boy traveled on a special bus to and from Meherdeep. So that's it. I didn't want to read. I'm trying to keep the aerograms and things inside protected paper, but that's what I wrote out for at least this talk. Maybe I can read some more in future things if you want me to, but that's just a little taste of what Keshav sent to me.
So he and his entourage went to the fourth Amar Tithi.
Correct.
Yeah.
And by the time he had written the aerogram to me, he had been back in Hamirpur for probably a week or so.
Well, your Hamirpur tales are amazing, Richard. And I'm so grateful on that day in November of 73 that you said to me, what was it that you said to me?
Keep Hamirpur in your mind if you're going to India. Keshav's a pretty neat guy to hang out with.
Yeah,
Something like that.
you said, you said, if Pukar is, if you are still, you being me, if you're still at Meherdeep at the time of Amartithi, seek out Pukar and ask Pukar if you can accompany him back to Hamirpur. That was your direct suggestion. And I'm so grateful to you for that, as is Bob. Well, any questions from the few that are with us in the moment? Any final thoughts? Diana, would you take a moment and let everybody know about the reading of Keshav Narayan Nigam's biography, which came into print posthumously by his PhD daughter. When is that happening?
Oh, we meet on Wednesdays and we're reading the life story of Keshav Nigam that he wrote in English. And it's an amazing, amazing book to read. And you mentioned it, Richard. It is truly wonderful.
What time is that on Wednesdays?
We meet here. This is East Coast time. We meet from excuse me, 10:30 to 11:30 or a little later. And we're probably 2/3 of the way through. We've enjoyed it so much. It's just an amazing book.
Excuse me, is that 10:30 a.m. or 10:30 p.m.?
AM. Eastern. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And if someone doesn't have, I think I do have a book around somewhere.
you don't need it. It's on the trust website
Okay, got
and I
it.
show it. So if you want to come and visit, with us while we read and we stop and discuss at intervals. And we just marvel at his love for Baba, his trust in Baba, incredible trust in Baba, what he's gone through. I don't know if he talked with anybody about all of the personal, just his life at work, his different work situations, how Baba worked with him at work, worked with him in Baba work. I don't know what to say. I've never had the experience reading someone's story of how it seems so natural with the Mandali that they love and trust Baba, but with Keshav Nigam, there's this sense of disgust because we find out he tells his story from way before he even knew about Baba, and how at first he had no interest in Baba, rejected Baba, and then came to love Baba. It's an amazing, beautiful story, and we're not done with it. So, yeah. So
Diana, I have a question about your where you are in the reading of it. One of the anecdotes that I believe he told us when we were there was that he was in a train wreck going to Baba when he was on his way to visit with Baba. Does that ring a bell?
You'd have to ask someone else.
Okay.
Because when I'm hosting, I don't give myself to the reading 100%, and I don't hold on to it, and I don't participate as much as I would like to in involving myself in the story. It's just how I am as a host. But there's so many amazing experiences.
Richard, did Keshav ever tell you that story?
To the best of my memory, no. by the time, and I say this as respectfully and as lovingly as I can, by the time I met and had the good fortune to spend some time with him, he was an old, fragile man who could barely speak, and which doesn't mean that it wasn't an extremely valuable situation, but he was not prone to be able to talk at a great length with stories. Just being in his presence seemed to be, and just telling him about ourselves seemed to be more of what he was interested in as an old, fragile man, um, wanting to learn more about these young Westerners who were up in his backwoods district, just amazed that we had gotten that far.
Yeah. Yeah, you
Just
know, there are a couple of videos on online that we can see where he's talking and we see his condition and how difficult it must have been to communicate with him. I mean,
Yes,
you know, by speaking. Obviously, you had a beautiful communication by being there.
just by being there.
Yeah.
I'm not aware of those videos.
Yeah, online. I don't know. I just go to YouTube and look for Keshav Nigam. I bet you'll find him.
Wow. Great idea.
Great idea.
by the way, I'll just give you the gist of the story I'm referring to,
Okay.
Great.
where he was on his way to Baba in the train, and it was a very serious accident. In fact, I mean, people died in this accident. In fact, what one of his memories is somebody walking by the train car that he was in, and saying, "Oh, I think that particular car, was not as damaged as so many of the other cars around it. For some reason, that particular car was prevented from maybe going up in flame or something. But somebody said there must be somebody there who loves God, or that God loves, for that car to be the way it is, And he heard that person from inside the car, that train
Amazing.
car. He heard them say that, and he thought, I think it might be me."
What can
I
I?
read that story. I read that story somewhere, Ron.
Yeah.
And we're drawing to the close of our time together here. There's another program that's eagerly waiting to start, which we can all uh, stay online for or not. But I want to thank Richard for joining us today, and really appreciate that Ron has
Mhm.
stuck it out. And I'm looking forward to um, perhaps there'll be a reverse situation. Well, Ron will be the key speaker, and you will be our guest, Richard.
I hope so. Thank you.
Well, I look forward to setting that up with Ron, and possibly as early as next Monday. So, Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai. Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai.
EJ.
Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai.
EJ. Thanks, Alan. Thanks,
Thank
Richard.
you.
Diane.